If you think a touch is just something ordinary, then you've never met an alien who has never known what feelings are. And if you're someone who believes in connections that transcend all boundaries, then this is the story for you. Elias Rohr had seen his fair share of ugly space stations, but Zeta 9 took the crown and polished it with industrial grease. As his shuttle docked with a groan that sounded far too sentient for his liking, Elias couldn't help but smirk. "Home sweet home," he muttered, stepping onto the platform where the air smelled faintly of ozone, burnt circuits, and desperation. The place looked like someone had tried to design a luxury resort but gave up halfway and let a scrapyard finish the job. Giant solar fins jutted out like broken wings, and flickering lights blinked in patterns that suggested either a malfunction or a nervous breakdown. With a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and a data pad full of questionable translation algorithms, Elias adjusted his collar unsuccessfully, as always, and took his first squeaky step onto Zeta 9. His boot, loyal as ever, chirped every third stride. Perfect for making first impressions. He wasn't here for sightseeing. The Galactic Council, in all its infinite wisdom, had assigned him to a task no sane diplomat wanted: interpret for the Carolithians. A species so advanced, so enigmatic, that even the best AI translators turned their language into poetic nonsense. As Elias made his way through the labyrinthine corridors, each one colder and more metallic than the last, he rehearsed his usual defense mechanism: humor. After all, if you couldn't dazzle them with brilliance, confuse them with bad jokes. When he finally reached the diplomatic wing, the atmosphere shifted. The air grew heavier, quieter, as if even sound was afraid to linger here. The door slid open with a hiss that felt too ceremonial for his liking. And then he saw her. Standing near a hovering holomap, tall and impossibly graceful, was the most alien and yet mesmerizing figure Elias had ever encountered. Surell. He knew her name from the briefing, but no dossier could prepare him for this. Her skin shimmered like moonlit pearl, subtly rippling with hues of blue and violet beneath the surface, as if her emotions had been painted in light. Silver hair, woven into a perfect braid, cascaded over her shoulder, catching the dim glow of the room. But it was her ears, elongated, elegant, twitching ever so slightly, that told him she was listening long before he spoke. And those gloves, translucent, delicate, almost like spun glass. A barrier, not just against touch, but perhaps against the world itself. Elias realized he'd been staring too long. Time to deploy the signature Rohr charm. "Hi," he said, his voice echoing awkwardly in the cavernous silence. "I'm Elias. Your translator, and, depending on how this goes, possibly your comedic relief." Surell turned to face him fully, her expression carved from serenity itself. For a heartbeat, she said nothing. Then, with a voice as smooth as starlight, she replied, "You are not funny yet." Elias grinned, feeling the familiar dance of nerves and bravado. "Give me time. It's early." There a flicker. The faintest tilt at the corner of her lips. Not quite a smile, but enough to make Elias feel like he'd just scored the first point in an invisible game. She gestured gracefully toward a side chamber where symbols floated in mid-air, pulsing with a rhythm that made his head hurt just looking at them. As they walked side by side, Elias stole a glance at her. She moved like she belonged to a different dimension, untouched by gravity, untouched by, well, anything. So, he ventured, do Carolithians have a word for awkward silence, or are we inventing that together? Her ears twitched again. Silence is preferred. Right, Elias nodded. Good to know. I specialize in ruining that. For a moment, the only response was the soft hum of the glyphs surrounding them. But Elias caught it the subtle way she lingered half a step closer than before, the brief glance when she thought he wasn't looking. Surell was curious. Beneath that polished exterior and those emotionless gloves, something stirred. As the session began, Elias fumbled with the alien syntax, tossing out theories and, occasionally, ill-timed puns. He wasn't sure if she truly misunderstood his jokes or pretended to. Either way, every slight twitch of her ear became a victory. By the end of the first hour, he knew two things for certain. 1. Carolithian language was a nightmare wrapped in a riddle and sprinkled with quantum metaphors. 2. Surell wasn't as detached as she seemed. When he packed up his data pad, he dared one last quip. Same time tomorrow? I'll bring better jokes. Maybe even coffee that doesn't taste like existential dread. Surell didn't answer immediately. Then, as he turned to leave, he heard her voice soft, almost imperceptible. Do not be late, Elias. And just like that, he walked out of the chamber with a smile, unaware that a single human had just begun to thaw the heart of a civilization that had forgotten how to feel. In the cold metal belly of Zeta 9, surrounded by stars and silence, something warmer had begun to flicker. The days on Zeta 9 blurred together in a rhythm of cold corridors, flickering lights, and the soft hum of alien glyphs. But for Elias, each morning felt a little less sterile, a little less like routine, and that had everything to do with Surell. By the third session, the translation work had become less about deciphering language and more about deciphering each other. Elias arrived, as usual, with his data pad under one arm and a cup of synth coffee in hand, though calling it coffee was generous. Surell stood by the console, her fingers hovering over the pulsing symbols, her expression as unreadable as ever. Yet Elias noticed the way her ears twitched the moment she sensed him enter, a subtle acknowledgement that no briefing manual could have prepared him for. You're early, she remarked without turning. Or maybe you're just late, Elias countered, settling into his spot beside her. Time is relative, after all. Einstein said that, or maybe it was my uncle during a family dinner. Surell's head tilted ever so slightly, the Carolithian equivalent of indulging his nonsense. They worked in near silence, but it was no longer the heavy, suffocating quiet of strangers. It was something lighter, punctuated by Elias's occasional mutterings and the faint sound of glyphs rearranging themselves like living constellations. At one point, Elias squinted at a particularly convoluted symbol. This one, he said, pointing, either means collective memory or beware of falling furniture. Context is key. Surell glanced at him, her silver eyes reflecting the glyph's glow. It refers to ancestral resonance. Ah, close enough, Elias grinned. Though falling furniture can be pretty traumatic too. For a heartbeat, he thought she might ignore the comment as usual. But then there it was, a faint exhale, almost like a sigh, but lighter. If he didn't know better, he'd call it amusement. Encouraged, Elias decided to push his luck. You know, he began, stretching his arms theatrically, This symbol here reminds me of an ancient human ritual. A complex sequence of movements used primarily in social bonding and, occasionally, to ward off embarrassment. Surell regarded him with that calm, analytical gaze. Explain. It's called disco, Elias said solemnly. Specifically, the funky galaxy slide. Her ears twitched. Demonstrate. He blinked. Wait, seriously? You introduced the concept. Now provide empirical data. Elias sighed, setting his day-top hat aside. All right, but remember, you asked for this. With the grace of someone who had long abandoned shame, Elias began to move awkward hip swings, exaggerated arm waves, and a spin that nearly made him trip over his own feet. The sterile chamber became his dance floor, and the glyphs pulsed in confused sympathy. When he finished, slightly out of breath and fully aware of how ridiculous he looked, he glanced at Surell. For a moment, she was motionless. Then, a sound soft, crystalline, like wind chimes caught in zero gravity. She was laughing. It wasn't loud, nor did it last long, but it was real. Genuine. Her hand even lifted to cover her mouth, as if surprised by her own reaction. Elias felt a strange warmth bloom in his chest, far beyond the satisfaction of landing a joke. He had made her feel something, a spark in a world that had long since gone cold. Was that a laugh? He asked, grinning like a fool. Surell composed herself quickly, though a faint shimmer of color danced beneath her skin. It was unexpected. I'll take that as a yes, Elias said, settling back into his chair, triumphant. The rest of the session flowed differently. The silence between them wasn't just tolerable, it was comfortable. Occasionally, Elias would catch her glancing at him, not with the detached curiosity of a scientist, but with something softer, more human. As the hours passed, Elias became acutely aware of the subtle shifts, the way Surell no longer maintained a strict distance, how her gloved hands hovered closer to his when pointing at symbols, how their conversations drifted from linguistics to fragments of personal history. Do humans always use humor as a defense mechanism? She asked at one point, her voice genuinely inquisitive. Pretty much, Elias replied. It's either that or existential dread, and I find jokes easier to manage. Her ears twitched again, a sign he was beginning to recognize as her version of a smile. When the session finally ended, neither of them moved to leave immediately. There was a hesitation, an unspoken acknowledgement that something had shifted between them. Elias stood, gathering his things slowly. Same time tomorrow? I might bring a new dance move. Surell didn't respond right away. Instead, she watched him with those reflective eyes, her expression unreadable but her presence undeniably closer. Elias, she said softly as he reached the doorway. He turned, eyebrows raised. Your movements were inefficient, she stated, but there was a glint in her eyes. He laughed, running a hand through his messy hair. Yeah, but they made you laugh. I'd call that efficient enough. As he walked back through the metallic corridors of Zeta 9, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that today had been more than just another translation session. Something invisible had begun to weave between them, a thread of connection, fragile yet undeniable. And in a place built of cold steel and silence, that single, fleeting laugh echoed louder than any sound he'd heard since arriving. The chamber was different today. Elias felt it the moment he stepped inside, the air heavier, charged with something he couldn't name. The soft hum of the alien glyphs had deepened, resonating not just in his ears but somewhere beneath his skin, like a forgotten melody vibrating through his bones. Surell stood at the center, surrounded by floating spheres, mnemonic nodes, she had called them. They pulsed faintly, their light shifting in unpredictable rhythms, as if sensing his arrival. It wasn't just the glyphs reacting anymore. It was the memories themselves. You feel it, Surell said quietly, not as a question but a statement of inevitability. Elias nodded, his gaze fixed on the orbs. Hard to miss when the room greets you like an old friend you don't remember? She watched him with those silver eyes, more reflective than ever, as if weighing the gravity of what was about to happen. Her gloved hands hovered near one of the spheres, but didn't touch. They resonate with you, she said, her voice carrying a note of something Elias couldn't quite place, wonder, perhaps, or fear. Lucky me, he replied, though his usual humor felt thinner in the charged atmosphere. Surell stepped closer, the folds of her iridescent robe whispering against the still air. Our nodes were designed to respond to emotional frequency, to harmonize with shared memory. But they have been silent for generations. Until now. Elias swallowed, feeling the weight of her words settle on his shoulders. And you think I'm, what? Some kind of emotional tuning fork? A catalyst, she corrected softly. Your presence disrupts the silence. One of the spheres drifted toward him, its glow intensifying. Elias instinctively reached out but hesitated, his fingers inches from its surface. Surell's voice was barely above a whisper. If you touch it with intention, it will show you, and you will show it. There was a reverence in her tone that made Elias's heart beat faster, not out of fear, but anticipation. He glanced at her, searching for certainty, but found only the same fragile curiosity mirrored in her gaze. All right, he breathed, let's see what songs these memories want to sing. His palm met the sphere, and the world unraveled. It wasn't sight or sound, not in any way he understood, but a cascade of sensations, colors that had no name, echoes of emotions that didn't belong solely to him. He felt warmth that wasn't physical, laughter that rang without noise, and a deep, aching nostalgia for places he'd never been. And then her. In the midst of the swirling memories, he saw Surell not as she appeared in the chamber, but as a fragment of herself. Alone, standing beneath a sky filled with shifting constellations, her bare hands reaching toward the stars, longing etched into every line of her figure. He felt her isolation, the centuries of quiet, the weight of a civilization that had chosen logic over feeling. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating. Elias gasped, pulling his hand back as the connection dimmed. The sphere floated away, its glow returning to a soft pulse. Surell watched him, her expression unreadable but her elongated ears tilted forward in clear anticipation. You saw, she said. I felt, Elias corrected, his voice hoarse. You've been carrying all that, alone. Her gaze dropped to her gloved hands. It is how we survive. He shook his head slowly, his heart still racing from the intensity of the connection. That's not living, Surell. That's enduring. For the first time, she looked uncertain, truly uncertain. The serenity she wore like armor had cracked, revealing something raw beneath. Another sphere drifted toward him, this one glowing brighter than the rest. Elias recognized the subtle pull. It wasn't just a node reaching for him. It was something inside him answering. He knew what memory it sought. His hand trembled as he touched it, and immediately, the chamber dissolved around him. He was no longer on Zeta 9. He was standing in a sunlit room on Earth, the scent of rain on warm pavement filling his lungs. A child's laughter echoed a sound so pure it hurt. His knees, small fingers wrapped around his, fragile and trusting. The memory sharpened, bringing with it the unbearable weight of knowing how quickly that warmth had faded. The illness. The hospital. The moment her hand slipped from his forever. Tears burned his eyes as the memory washed over him, not as a distant recollection but as if he were living it all over again. Then, amidst the sorrow, he felt another presence, Surell. Not physically, but within the resonance. She was there, witnessing, feeling what he felt. Her essence wrapped around the memory, not to intrude, but to understand. When Elias finally broke the connection, he stumbled back, breathless, tears streaking down his face. Surell stood before him, her silver eyes shimmering not with reflection, but with unshed tears of her own. A faint glow danced beneath her skin, colors swirling in ways they never had before. "I didn't know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't know pain could be so beautiful." Elias let out a shaky laugh, wiping his face. "Beautiful isn't the word I'd use." "It is," she insisted softly. "Because it means you felt deeply. You loved." Their eyes met, and in that fragile moment, the distance between human and alien, translator and diplomat, dissolved. Surell lifted her gloved hand, hovering it near his cheek but not daring to touch. Her fingers quivered, as if yearning to cross that final barrier. "They told us touch was dangerous," she murmured. "That feeling too much would destroy us." Elias leaned into the space between them, his voice barely audible. "Maybe feeling is what saves us." The spheres around them pulsed in harmony, the chamber humming with a resonance that felt like the first notes of a forgotten song. Neither of them moved to leave. They stood there, suspended between memory and possibility, as the silent symphony of shared pain and understanding began to weave something entirely new. In the heart of cold steel and ancient silence, Elias and Surell had found a spark, a connection deeper than words, deeper than touch. And for the first time, the memories began to sing. The hum of the chamber had changed. Elias stood still, feeling the vibration ripple through the floor, up his spine, and into the air around him. It wasn't just sound, it was a pulse, a heartbeat that didn't belong to any one being, but to something far greater. The mnemonic nodes floated like stars caught in an unseen current, their lights no longer flickering aimlessly but glowing in synchronized harmony. Surell was at the center of it all, her arms slightly raised, her iridescent robe flowing like liquid starlight. The colors beneath her opalescent skin swirled wildly: violet, azure, soft gold, emotions awakened after centuries of silence. Her silver eyes were wide, reflecting not just a chamber but the vastness of something reaching far beyond. Above them, the console blazed to life, glyphs cascading faster than Elias could track. And then it happened, the resonance spread outward, beyond the walls of Zeta 9. Surell gasped, staggering as if an invisible force had struck her chest. Elias rushed forward, steadying her by the shoulders, feeling the faint hum radiating through her body. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. Her lips trembled. "The network, it's waking up. All of it." A low tremor shook the station, but it wasn't mechanical. It was deeper, like the echo of a forgotten song vibrating through the fabric of space itself. Suddenly, the viewport lit up with a pulse from the void. A distortion shimmered just beyond the asteroid field, a vast, ethereal presence, neither fully visible nor entirely formless. Elias's breath caught. "Is that a thought form?" Surell whispered, awe and fear mingling in her voice. "An ancient echo of our collective mind, we believe them lost." The entity pulsed again, its rhythm matching the harmony within the chamber. It wasn't just calling, it was responding. Surell's knees buckled, and Elias caught her before she fell. Her gloved hands clutched at his arms, the fabric of her control unraveling. "I can feel them," she choked out. "Every voice, every memory, it's too much." Elias lowered her gently to the floor, kneeling beside her as the nodes swirled overhead like a constellation reborn. "Surell, listen to me," he said, his tone softer now, anchoring her fraying composure. "This isn't a burden. It's who you are, who your people were meant to be." Tears shimmered in her silver eyes, cascading down her cheeks for the first time in her life. The colors beneath her skin pulsed in chaotic waves, reflecting the storm within. "We were taught to fear this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "To fear feeling." Elias reached out, his hand hovering just above hers, respecting the barrier of her gloves but letting his presence speak where words faltered. "They were wrong," he murmured. "Feeling isn't weakness, Surell. It's strength. It's what connects you not just to your past, but to your future." Her breath hitched, a sob escaping as centuries of repression shattered within her. The resonance surged, the chamber now alive with the soundless music of awakening. The thought form outside pulsed brighter, its energy wrapping around the station like a cosmic embrace. Through the viewport, it was no longer a distortion, it was a luminous web of memories, singing in frequencies that transcended language. Surell's gloved hands trembled violently. Her gaze met Elias's, and in that instant, he saw the decision forming behind her tears. With a slow, deliberate motion, she reached for the seam of her gloves. "I can't hold back anymore," she said, voice steady despite the chaos. Elias nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then don't." "I'm here." The glove slid from her hands like mist dissolving at dawn. Bare-skinned, her fingers radiated a soft glow, threads of light weaving through the air. The moment her palm touched the console, the chamber exploded with light, not destructive, but expansive. The nodes flared in unison, the glyphs aligning into a perfect, fluid harmony. Surell cried out, not in pain, but in release, as the full force of her people's forgotten emotions cascaded through her. Elias shielded his eyes, but kept his hand on her shoulder, grounding her. Through the brilliance, he heard it not with his ears, but with something deeper. A song. It wasn't just music, it was existence itself singing. Grief, joy, love, loss, all entwined in a symphony older than stars. When the light finally dimmed, Surell collapsed into Elias's arms, her body trembling like a tuning fork still resonating with the universe. Her face was wet with tears, her silver hair unbound and flowing freely. She looked up at him, her eyes no longer distant or reflective, but vividly alive. "I remember," she whispered, her voice filled with awe and exhaustion. "All of it." Elias held her gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're not alone anymore?" Outside, the thought form pulsed one last time, a soft, contented glow before settling into a calm orbit around Zeta 9. The resonance that had once been chaotic now hummed in perfect balance. The chamber, once sterile and cold, now felt like a sanctuary. The nodes floated peacefully, casting warm light across the walls. Surell sat up slowly, her bare hand reaching for Elias's. This time, there was no hesitation. Their fingers intertwined, and the connection was immediate, a quiet, powerful bond that needed no words. In that moment, Elias realized this was more than diplomacy, more than survival. This was the rebirth of a people and the beginning of something neither human nor Carolithian could have imagined alone. As they sat together, surrounded by the echoes of countless lives and emotions, the stars beyond Zeta 9 no longer felt cold. They felt like home. The silence that followed was unlike any before, warm, full, alive. The chamber no longer hummed with tension but breathed with quiet harmony. Light from the mnemonic nodes drifted gently like fireflies suspended in a dream. Surell stood slowly, her bare hands glowing faintly in the dim light. The gloves that once defined her boundaries now rested, forgotten, on the console. She looked down at her fingers as if seeing them for the first time not as instruments of danger, but as conduits of connection. Elias rose beside her, his gaze soft, waiting, not pushing, not speaking, just present. Surell turned to him, her silver eyes reflecting the golden hues of the awakened chamber. There was no fear in them now, only a calm certainty born from everything they had shared. Without a word, she reached out. Her hand, delicate and steady, found his. The touch was light, barely more than a whisper against his skin, but Elias felt it like a supernova in slow motion. Not explosive, but expansive, as if the universe had gently unfolded within that single point of contact. For a heartbeat, neither of them breathed. The connection was deeper than sensation. It was memory, emotion, and something older, something eternal. When Surell finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. "You are the first human I have ever touched." Elias's lips curved into a quiet smile, his thumb brushing lightly over the back of her hand. "And you're the first alien who's ever made me feel like the universe isn't such a lonely place." Her elongated ears twitched, the faintest glimmer of amusement sparking in her gaze. But more than that, there was peace, a rare, profound stillness that came not from absence, but from fullness. They stood like that for a while, surrounded by the gentle pulse of the nodes and the soft glow of shared understanding. When they finally moved, it was in unison, hands still intertwined as they walked toward the wide viewport at the edge of the chamber. Beyond the glass stretched the infinite canvas of space. Stars scattered across the void, distant and cold to any ordinary eye. But to them, in this moment, the stars felt different. They weren't just points of light, they were echoes of every connection waiting to be made. Far in the distance, the thought form drifted, no longer a haunting presence but a companion, a living memory orbiting Zeta 9 like a guardian of all that had been rediscovered. Surell's fingers tightened slightly around Elias's. "They can feel it," she whispered, her gaze never leaving the stars. Across Carolithian space, the resonance is spreading. Elias nodded, his voice low and steady. A song that was never meant to be forgotten. She glanced at him, her expression serene but filled with something deeper: gratitude, hope, and a quiet affection that didn't need to be named. "Do you think they are ready?" she asked. Elias chuckled softly. "No one's ever ready for feelings, Surell. That's what makes them worth having." Her lips curved into a gentle smile, a real one this time, not a flicker or a twitch, but a full expression of who she had become. They stood in silence again, but now it was the kind of silence that sang beneath the surface, a harmony felt rather than heard. Elias let out a slow breath, his eyes tracing the curve of the thought form's glow. "So, what now?" Surell considered for a moment before answering. "Now we teach them not to fear the song. We remind them how to listen and how to feel." He nodded, a sense of quiet purpose settling over him. "Together." "Always," she replied, her voice carrying the weight of a promise. The mnemonic nodes around them responded with a subtle shift in light, as if acknowledging the pact between two souls from different worlds. Hand in hand, they remained by the viewport, watching as the resonance rippled across unseen distances, an invisible thread weaving through the hearts and minds of a civilization reawakening to itself. In that vast expanse of stars, where cold logic had once ruled, warmth had returned, not through grand gestures or cosmic forces, but through something far simpler. A touch. And as the quiet symphony of emotions spread across galaxies, Elias and Surell knew that they had not only bridged two beings but had given voice to a song that would echo through the universe for generations to come. The language of feeling. The music of connection. And above all, the quiet power of a first touch shared between two worlds ready to remember what it meant to be alive.